Welcome back to the ASEAN GRI-SM Sustainability Summit 2021, leaving no one behind. We bring back our hosts, Tim Daniels, consultant for investor relations and sustainability at SM Investments, and Dr. Alia Dige, regional director for the Global Reporting Initiative.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch. We hope you had a chance to stretch your legs. For those of you who are just tuning in this afternoon for the first time, we completed a good session this morning. The topic was purpose-driven business, lessons from the pandemic. But before we carry on with this afternoon session, we'd like to recognize once again EcoBusiness and Manila Bulletin, who are our media partners with this summit.
For this afternoon session, we aim to have a meaningful conversation around how to start the journey to credible net zero target achievements. I'm sure you've heard by now the IPCC report released in August, sounding the alarm for Code Red for Humanity. So with that report, we are called upon to take a closer look at how we can be more deliberate in our contributions to achieving the Paris Agreement target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is a red alert warning that we all need to heed.
Let us welcome our panelists for the next session. From the Philippines, we have Raymond Rufino. He is the CEO of NEO, the largest owner, developer, and manager of office buildings in Bonifacio Global City. NEO has made a public commitment to be net zero, being the world's first portfolio to be certified with EDGE Zero Carbon, and has the first office portfolio in Southeast Asia to achieve the WELL Health Safety Seal. Its entire portfolio is also certified 5 stars under BERDE, Buildings for Ecologically Responsive Design Excellence, a national voluntary green building rating tool of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, Raymond Rufino.
Our next panelist is Sara Jane Ahmed, Finance Advisor of the Vulnerable Group of 20, Group Ministers of Finance of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. The V20 was established to strengthen and promote economic and financial cooperation and action to address climate change risks and opportunities and facilitate the transition to a low-carbon, resilient global economy. Let's welcome Sara Jane Ahmed.
Jade Feinberg joins us from the Singapore Exchange, where she is the Vice President for Sustainability and Sustainable Finance. SGX is the leading and trusted securities and derivatives market infrastructure, operating equity, fixed income, currency, and commodity markets to the highest regulatory standards. It also operates a multi-asset sustainability platform, SGX First, or Future in Reshaping Sustainability Together. Everyone, Jade Feinberg.
Joining us from the Philippines is Katrina Francisco. She is the Senior Director for Climate Change and Sustainability Services of SGV and Company. SGV is currently the Philippines' largest multidisciplinary professional services firm with 9 offices across the country. The company provides integrated solutions that draw on diverse and deep competencies in assurance, tax, strategy, and transactions, and consulting services. Let's welcome Katrina Francisco.
And our next panelist is Giulia Genuardi, Head of Sustainability Planning, Performance Management, and Human Rights at Enel SPA in Italy. She is also a GRI Global Sustainability Standards Board member. Enel SPA is an Italy-based multinational power company and an integrated operator in the global power, gas, and renewables markets. It is active in Europe and is present in more than 30 countries, producing energy with over 86 gigawatts of installed capacity. Everyone, Giulia Genuardi.
Our next panelist is Andrew Glass. He is the Head of Sales and Partnerships for Viridios Group. Viridios Group allocates investment capital to carbon finance projects that champion co-benefits in line with the UN SDGs. They also provide structuring and advisory on sustainable development assets, carbon credit portfolio and management, and develops and deploys AI technologies to facilitate the flow of investment into the achievement of SDGs. Let's welcome Andrew Glass.
And rounding out our esteemed panelists is Kim Schumacher, GRI Global Sustainability Standards Board member and a senior research fellow and lecturer at the Tokyo Institute of Technology. TIT is the largest institution for higher education in Japan dedicated to science and technology, one of first 5 designated national university and selected as a top type university of top global university project by the Japanese government. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kim Schumacher.
And moderating our powerhouse panel today is Matthias Gelber. He is the ESG advisor for the Philippine Stock Exchange and brand ambassador of Avantwood, Finland. Matthias was voted as the greenest person on the planet in a global online competition, and he received the Green Icon of the Year award in Malaysia. He has given eco talks in 42 countries worldwide. Let's welcome Matthias Gelber.
But before we proceed to our panel discussion, to give a keynote speech for this session, we welcome the recognized champion for a decarbonized and regenerative future. Mr. Federico Lopez is the chairman and CEO of First Philippine Holdings, and he is the 2020 Management Man of the Year by the Management Association of the Philippines. First Philippine Holdings is a diverse Filipino conglomerate with principal interests in power, real estate, construction, and manufacturing. At First Filipino Holdings, responsible investment is defined as the interplay of low-carbon operations, protecting nature's integrity, social inclusion, and robust economic growth. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have with us Mr. Picky Lopez.
Thank you very much, Tim, for that introduction, and also for inviting me to be able to share my thoughts on this journey to net zero. Now, at the outset of all the chaos and uncertainty of the COVID pandemic last year, we set about recrafting our mission and purpose for the FPH group, which included First Gen and all our other subsidiaries. Now, after months of intense debate and deliberation, we centered on 10 highly selected words, which is to forge collaborative pathways for the decarbonized and regenerative future. Now, since we launched it at the annual shareholders meeting last year, the recasted mission achieved so much traction internally and has become a beacon of sorts, reorienting our strategy and choice of capabilities and businesses as we move forward. The power of those 10 words to inspire and provide direction surpassed my expectations. And I can say that all the executive hours that we spent hammering it out last year, if you could weigh it, was really worth its weight in gold. Now, although the wordsmithing took us just several months, its genesis began almost 7 years earlier, in November 2013 to be exact. When Typhoon Yolanda hit the country almost 8 years ago, she destroyed our largest geothermal power plants in Leyte, pulverizing them beyond operability. We also lost all contact with our 743 employees, not knowing whether they and their families were alive. Immediately after ascertaining the safety of every one of them through search teams that we sent into Leyte from Cebu and Manila, despite suffering personal losses themselves, they selflessly organized themselves into a nerve center for rescue and relief throughout the island, clearing roads, flying and barging in fuel, gensets, lights, medicines, food, water, solar lamps, tarps, blankets, providing psychological first aid, and for Christmas, even entertainment to bring smiles back onto people's faces. In those critical weeks and months after the super typhoon showed us its wrath, our one objective was to keep the embers of hope flickering and alive at a time when people needed them the most. Many of us to this day continue to treasure that moment of service as among the highest points of our careers. Now, being at the center of all that fear, suffering, trauma, loss of lives, property, and livelihoods wrought by the most powerful typhoon to ever hit the planet, it shook our very foundations as a company and as individuals. None of us can ever unsee that. And it was clear that the world had changed and business as usual wasn't going to cut it anymore. To us then, these were what we'd call weak signals to very powerful forces. Yet it took us another 2.5 years till we finally pronounced at our annual shareholders meeting in 2016 that we would never develop, finance, or operate any coal-fired power plants because of their connection to global warming and our country's vulnerability, being among the top 5, top 10 countries in the world. Now, over the last 5 years, we've seen concerns over climate change escalate into the climate crisis it's visibly become today. The latest news images of record heat waves, droughts, wildfires in North America and Australia, record flooding in the eastern US, Western Europe, and central China have all been terrifying precursors to the UN IPCC's 6th assessment report issued last August. This latest report, produced by 200 scientists and thousands of volunteers from 66 countries, has the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warning that this is a code red for humanity. And it's undeniable that our planet's climate is changing primarily from human-caused emissions of fossil fuels. And it's changing faster and more dangerously than we thought just a few years ago. Now, all this is leading up to COP26 in Glasgow this November, in a few days, where we expect stronger global action to be taken towards slowing or stopping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, remember that at Paris COP21 in 2015, the world applauded soft agreements that pledged actions toward a 2 degrees Celsius global warming target. Now, hardly any of those pledges are being met today, which still puts the world on course for a planet that's 3 to 4 degrees Celsius warmer by the end of the century. Now, that's clearly catastrophic and uninhabitable. However, even the 2 degrees Celsius target, which was applauded in Paris, will change our planet beyond recognition. Close to 99% of coral reefs will disappear under that scenario, and extreme heat, flooding, and 1 in 100-year sea level events will become regular occurrences, existentially threatening all coastal cities. So what does keeping a 1.5 degrees Celsius really mean? The science tells us we have anywhere from 300 to 400 gigatons of greenhouse gases left to emit before we exceed that number. Since the world currently emits 51 gigatons of greenhouse gases each year, which includes not only CO2, but methane, nitrous oxides, and F-gases, we have anywhere from 6 to 8 years remaining before we lose any chances of hitting that goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we'll be left with having to contend with a harsher 2 degrees Celsius world or worse. The latest UN IPCC AR6 makes this very clear. The window for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is closing fast. Now, closer to home, you may ask, if Philippine emissions only account for 0.4% of global emissions, why should we care about decarbonizing our lives and our economies? Why not just leave that to the big emitters like the US and China? Now, firstly, given the Philippines is among the 10 most vulnerable nations on Earth to climate risks, we should be among the most driven to amplify calls for commitments to 1.5 degrees Celsius world. But secondly, the calls for limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the coming years can only intensify. Talking again about weak signals to powerful forces, this movement is one that will not progress in linear fashion, but instead will accelerate exponentially. With such forces, it pays to sense those signals when they're still faint. While the signals are becoming clearer for everyone, In the coming years, we will see Gen Xers, Millennials, and Gen Zers gaining more voice and power as consumers, employees, and even our employers. And in January 2021, results of the UNDP Oxford University People's Climate Vote, which was the biggest global survey on climate change among 1 million people across 50 countries, showed that 64% of the participants believe that climate change is an emergency that requires urgent responses from countries. Now, it's interesting to note that almost half of the poll participants were between 14 to 18 years old. Now, I can't even begin to imagine the changes that are about to take place in consumer buying habits, supply chains, the rewiring of finance, and even social norms, just to name a few, as these beliefs progress and mature. The up-and-coming generations care even more deeply about climate issues than us baby boomers. The combined effects of all these are being seen in how companies and brands are reorienting around decarbonization goals. We're witnessing similar shifts among financial institutions, investors, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and large pension funds. Many are beginning to place a shadow carbon price in their investment decisions, with many countries already talking of explicit carbon pricing from $48 per ton to even north of $100 per ton. Many countries and an increasing number of the world's largest engineering firms are also saying they'll no longer build coal plants. Even cross-border carbon tariffs that measure embodied carbon in products are also being contemplated. And this becomes even more viable because of blockchain technology. Now, a number of countries like New Zealand and the UK are also leading the way in making climate-related disclosures along the lines of the TCFD framework and making them mandatory for banks and insurance companies by 2021 and 2022, respectively, and even pretty soon, a lot of listed companies. Now, this TCFD framework, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and this, of course, Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg, who are pushing this very strongly. This framework asks you to spell out not only your physical risks and transition risks, but also your opportunities from climate change as well. Unlike other measures of carbon footprints, which look at your current snapshot, this framework complements those snapshots and forces you to think forward strategically about those financial risks and opportunities from climate change. Now, as more adopt this, the winners and the losers become more evident, and investment decisions and potentially stranded assets become clearer. Hong Kong, Switzerland, and Canada are following soon, and the G7 has recently announced in June that they are also backing the idea of mandatory disclosures. Janet Yellen, the US Secretary of Treasury, likewise put her weight behind mandatory TCFD reporting last April, claiming it already has momentum and the support of 110 financial regulators, including 50 central banks. The NGFS, or the Network for Greening of the Financial System, which includes our very own Bangko Sentral of the Philippines, already has 95 member central banks and monetary supervising authorities, and 16 observers such as the ADB, IMF, OECD, and the World Bank, IFC, etc. Now, every day, I hear of new countries and huge important companies laying down net zero targets, some voluntary, but more increasingly mandating and embedding them in policy and legislation. Now, these are just tips of the iceberg, but the massive changes underway will alter every industry on the planet in the next 10 years, some of them beyond how we recognize them today. They will change in two ways. First, because the changes from a warmer climate are already here, they're baked in and even accelerating. The words of Al Gore here in Manila in 2016 still reverberate in my mind each succeeding year that I see the impacts of the climate crisis. And it's when he said, all our infrastructure was built for a world that's now changed. The second and more profound cause is because of the rapid need to transition to net zero carbon by 2050. To give you a sense of scale, COVID-19 in 2020 brought emissions down globally by 5 to 7%. We need that scale of reduction each year till mid-century just to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So a child born today can only have a personal lifetime carbon footprint that's just 1/8 that of his or her grandparents. This challenge is greater than anything man has ever surmounted in human history. But we don't have a choice. It's nothing less than an existential threat to humanity. And human activity has caused us to recklessly leave the stable climate that this planet has had over the last 11,000 years. So we've just left the Holocene epoch and now entered the uncertainty of what scientists now want to call the Anthropocene. Now, all that may sound terrifying, but last December came a sliver of good news. The leading IPCC scientists also revealed something described as game-changing and new in the scientific understanding of climate change. To quote the noted climate scientist, Dr. Jerry Rogels, the lead author of the latest UN IPCC Assessment Report 6, where he says, "It is our best understanding that if we bring down GHG emissions to net zero, the warming will level off. The climate will stabilize within a decade or two." Now, I was personally elated and filled with hope when I read that pronouncement of the latest scientific consensus, which is a huge paradigm shift from the idea that decades and centuries of additional warming were already baked into the planet, as suggested by previous IPCC reports. Now, this makes net zero an even more compelling and inspiring narrative for the future. However, beyond just halting any additional warming is the Herculean task of preserving, rebuilding, and more importantly, regenerating the planet and everything that we've lost and we're losing. This is why we believe sustainability is no longer enough in a world that's badly in need of healing and renewal. We specifically chose to use the word regeneration in our recrafted mission with all the responsibility that carries. Now, we're not a full-on regenerative company today. No one is yet. But we chose it deliberately to signal to our people that they have a license to adopt this new mindset as our inherent way of doing business, and that it's perfectly fine for them to bring their values to work every day. Being regenerative will not scale if it only comes from the top. It has to permeate the organization and how it does business day to day. So progressive or even regenerative businesses need to align themselves, their resources, and their capabilities toward a mission that seeks to elevate everything they touch. That's their customers, their employees, their suppliers, contractors, the environment, communities, and of course, their shareholders and investors. CSR or philanthropy may ease our consciences, but the sad fact is they may never scale up enough to heal our hurting world in time. Now, there's an urgency for all of us to go beyond incremental sustainability and transform into regenerative forces that align our profit engines with the need for a better, more just world and a safer planet. Collectively, we have the creativity and innovative energy needed to solve the world's greatest problems. And unlocking these will be the foundation to some of the greatest business opportunities in the coming century. And Paul Polman, who's the former chairman of Unilever and also the former head of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, he refers to the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals as simply the world's greatest business plan. Now, you may ask, what could a decarbonized and regenerative world look like? We could carve out a definitive path to a decarbonized electricity system in the country that charts a transition from fossil fuels like coal and natural gas today to renewables like geothermal, hydro, solar, and wind. Also, of course, storage batteries and energy efficiency and other smart energy technologies. The costs of renewable energy and battery storage have come down considerably in the last decade or so. And now, at our subsidiary Energy Development Corp, we are also working on bringing down the cost of geothermal power, although admittedly not quite as dramatically as what we've seen for wind and solar. And as RE and battery storage costs drop further in the coming years, their penetration into our grids, rooftops, and our lives will increase. However, if we want to encourage a deeper penetration and deep decarbonization, we must effectively plan for the intermittency issues that arise with renewable energy. There are now a host of solutions to the issues that intermittency and seasonality bring to a grid that would maximize the penetration of renewable energy in the transition. The power industry has to use the full arsenal of technological solutions to manage the variability and intermittency inherent in renewable energy, and make energy consumption more efficient, and thus facilitate the rapid lowering of carbon footprints. Our own company's transition to a decarbonized future will be anchored in the next few years by our efforts to bring in liquefied natural gas, or LNG, through first gen before the end of the Malampaya, indigenous Malampaya gas field. The natural gas-fired power plants we have today that keep the lights on and complement renewable energies intermittency nicely because of their flexibility and speed are useful in ushering the age of pure renewables and batteries. Now, bear in mind, though, that we are also planning for its eventual phase-out in ways that complement a pathway to net zero by 2050 and consistent with the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. And they could eventually be repowered into using clean hydrogen in the coming decades as technology develops and attains commerciality. Now, if we green the electricity grid, it opens up the electrification of transport and many other industrial manufacturing processes, which today are run by polluting fuels like gasoline, diesel, and bunker fuel. What's more, the added benefit of improving our urban air quality will be tremendous. Electrification of all aspects of our lives, simultaneous with the greening of the grid, will be absolutely essential to deep decarbonization. Now, beyond the energy sector, we would reimagine how and where we get our food, our building materials, and even integrating carbon-negative materials like bamboo. The integrative design of buildings and infrastructure, how we cool or warm them, how we insulate them, district cooling, what refrigerants we use, how we dispose of those refrigerants, which are the F gases we're talking about, and even smart buildings and smart building technology, etc. And beyond designing for a decarbonized world, just as important would be planning for resilience amidst a harsher climate. Here we could reimagine how we design our cities with resilient infrastructure like underground power lines and distributed generation, and microgrids, as well as circularity in the use of water, rainwater, and waste, which is sadly a valuable resource that we're literally throwing away. But it will also be about building cities that encourage social integration, community, and compassion. The so-called 15-minute cities being planned for by progressive urban developers and mayors in Paris, Barcelona, London, Detroit, Melbourne, and Portland, Oregon, where work, shopping, health, and culture are not more than a 15-minute walk, bike ride, or mass transit ride away. They've reclaimed roads from the automobile and used them to create wider sidewalks, play areas, and bikeable, walkable spaces that incorporate nature, public art, and public performances. They're characterized by having a more thoroughly integrated urban fabric that builds social cohesion among income classes and races. Certain cities like Amsterdam are even prioritizing affordable rental housing, as much as 30 to 40% of land area, and even integrating them into their affluent neighborhoods. Now, these ideas merely scratch the surface, but preparing for the needs of a rapidly changing world now will ensure that not only do we avoid getting locked into stranded assets, but that we're equipped to thrive as individuals, companies, communities, and as a nation in the coming decade. But one thing is clear, this can only be a massive collaborative undertaking for the world, and none of us can do this alone. Thank you.
Lopez. Greetings all the way from Germany. Normally I'm in the Philippines, but currently I'm in Germany here. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today. We have an amazing panel. it will be quite challenging for me to bring everybody's voice to the table, but I will do my best. I will do some tough German timekeeping. First, I want to congratulate Chairman Piqui Lopez for his excellent presentation. I love the combination of regeneration and decarbonization. Just one quick question before I go with the rest of the panel. If the Philippines businesses, corporates that are currently listening to us, think about how can I start this path and what is the biggest opportunity behind it? What would be your simple top tips for them, how to get started and what opportunities to have in mind?
You know, Matthias, thanks for that question. That's a very interesting thing. You know, the one thing about it is that you know, there's a tendency. Decarbonization is a very it's tricky. We have to be very careful to make sure that as we head into decarbonization, one, we keep the lights on, but also we keep it affordable. Because otherwise, we're going to get a backlash against this, no? And you don't want that, especially for something as important as this. One thing I think that's missing, there's one element that's missing here. It's not, on the one hand, we can all decide to put up solar on our rooftops, etc., and all that. But I think what's missing is we need there's like a roadmap and a national decarbonization plan. No? And so I've tried. We're working with a number of with the company, like the Boston Consulting Group is one of those that we're working with to be able to develop one for the country. Which as soon as that's ready, we'll make that available for others. And then each one can basically find their own path and what role they can play in that decarbonization. Again, we can't do it all. We can only do a few of those things there. And the power sector is what probably our specialty. But the power sector, we also have to coordinate even with the distribution utilities, the cooperatives, with government, the regulatory agencies. It's massive. So in that sense, I think we're putting some of our weight behind that, being able to develop that decarbonization plan, and we'll make it accessible to the public when it's available.
Great, wonderful. Yeah. That will be an amazing support to get the pathways for different industries specific to a Philippines context and scenario. Thank you so much, Piqui Lopez. And there might be other questions for you later, but I will shift now to our panelists. We have altogether 7 panelists. So I would like to ask all of our panelists to be short and sharp in their contribution. I would love to start off, ladies first, with Singapore. Jade, all the way from Singapore. We heard it from Piqui Lopez. It's challenging. It depends on what standard you use, the definition. You guys came up with a great white paper recommending credible decarbonization to the listed companies in Singapore, and I think as well beyond. What are your top tips, Jade, how people can get started and what they should have in mind to do this, to make this a credible journey?
Thank you for that question. Nice to be part of the panel, and hello from Singapore. As Mr. Lopez has said, Asia has unique challenges, and we don't want to leave anybody behind. So as a Singapore exchange, we brought out the report, which outlines 6 key steps that companies can take to support them at different stages of their decarbonization and transition journey. I think for us, we abide by the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and that's we've committed to set targets. And we the first Asian exchange to set those targets based on the SBTi direction. And the idea is, after all, the focus needs to be mostly on the material emissions. And broadly, there are 2 types of removals, credit and impact projects. But the focus needs to be on the reductions and maximization of the reductions planned over a given time frame. And this will be dependent on each sector, and it needs to be developed in a strategic pathway, which we've committed to by 2030.
Great, excellent. So science-based targets are the recommendation, and sector-relevant strategies. Our next panelist is Katrina from SGV. In their consulting and advisory work, they work all over the region. So Katrina, I'm really interested in hearing from you. What is the perspective in the region, the state of things in the region, and how can you convince your clients that this is a big opportunity, the decarbonization?
Thank you for that, Matthias. And please do allow me to answer that question through the climate disclosure report or barometer that we have issued. So we released in the middle of this year our third global climate risk disclosure barometer. And we've seen that there has been progress that's been made by companies in relation to disclosures. And this is actually where they would usually start, even before they go on and set targets in relation to decarbonization. What we have seen, though, is that although most of the disclosures or the coverage of the disclosures in relation to the TCFD has been greater than the quality of the disclosures that are being put out by the companies. So, for instance, we've seen that around 50% of the companies that we have looked at, they would disclose all the 11 recommendations of the TCFD, but in relation to quality of those disclosures, so we only see that only around 3% received a score of 100% in relation to quality. So that means there needs to be more that should be done by companies in relation to this. And what we've seen from a market perspective is that the best and the worst performing markets, it's really a function of how mature their particular market is in relation to sustainability or climate change. So whether they're governments or shareholders or investors, and even their local market regulators are being active in this particular space. And we as a firm, so we really committed to making businesses work for sustainability and making sustainability work for businesses. So, which is how we see that businesses will be able to create long-term value. And right now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift sustainability from being a more reporting-led conversation to a more value-based narrative. So, and we do that by, let's say, engaging the C-suites so that they're able to turn sustainability into a business opportunity, which can hopefully help their companies create value and protect value. So I guess that's it from my end.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katrina. The value focus here, I think, is very, very important. Next up on our panel, we have Sara. I can hear a lot of sound in the background. I'm not sure whether one of you guys needs to go on mute, but let's hope we can solve that somehow. We have Sara Jane. She works with the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and obviously social inequality is one of the challenges. We need the SDGs as a calibration. Sara Jane, how do you think local companies can add positive value to that and help overcoming the social inequality?
Matthias, thanks so much for that question. I think there's generally mutual interest and mutual benefit for private sector and governments to not be left with either stranded assets, stranded workers, stranded industries. And so as we look to the future where there are increasing climate shocks, COVID included, as part of this non-financial shock, it's clear that the investment opportunities, the reskilling, is not just an urgent humanitarian need, but it's also a sensible strategy towards building resilience, both in the local context, but also towards a more resilient global economy, especially as we are highly interconnected. It's important that we protect the supply chains, consumers, investment markets, and trade. So part of this is the technology transfer, reskilling, manufacturing partnerships. All of this is what we need to solve in the 2020s, basically, because this decade will define what our 2040s and 2050s will look like. And so there's certainly a lot of local opportunities with this transition.
Great. Thank you so much, Sara Jane, for the wise words. Interconnectedness, we all depend on one another, and particularly the non-financial shocks, they are unpredictable. We need to be ready for that. So very, very interesting point of view. And We will now come to Andrew. Andrew joins us as well from Europe. Andrew has done some very interesting work with regards to using AI and giving more visibility to carbon credit pricing. And how can that help, Andrew, to get more large companies on board with the whole decarbonization process?
Hi, Matthias. Thank you very much for the opportunity, everyone, to contribute here. Look, we believe in price transparency. Price transparency is extremely important for, going back to what Katrina just said, talking about value-based. Understanding what the transition is going to cost, what it is going to, and the benefits that it's going to bring to the whole ecosystem, both within your own companies, for all your stakeholders. It's important to understand what the value is. So what we've developed is we used AI technology to understand the value in the voluntary carbon markets and bring that price transparency on a globalized basis. What that also helps with is understanding ES and G, particularly because the voluntary carbon markets are full of charismatic components to each one of the projects. So understanding the value of those help companies understand, and particularly when you get to C-suite level and board level, and to communicate with your major shareholders on what this really means and turning it into a dollarized number. That's what we believe will help the adoption of voluntary carbon integration into your trajectory to your commitments to net zero, and your commitments to your stakeholders from an ESG perspective. And that's often overlooked as the interaction between the two when it comes to deciding how you're going to take that journey in your trajectory to net zero and your commitment to all your stakeholders. So that's what we bring, and we believe that that's a major contribution for inclusion and diversity and participation in the voluntary carbon markets, because then we can harness the power of capital markets to really contribute here. And that's where we'll see a lot more projects get up and running as well, because they will also know what the true value of their project is and what it can be marketed for. And that will help both communities especially, and also the environment when we look at many of these projects having a high impact on biodiversity as well.
Great. I love particularly as well your last point, because I was looking for SDG-rich carbon credits here in the Philippines, and I was struggling to find it, and people told me it's too expensive to get there. But I think that transparent carbon pricing can then encourage people to actually start those initiatives locally as well, because they can see what they can get from it. Wonderful, Andrew. Thanks so much. And now we have Giulia from Enel, one of the real corporate pioneers that has been setting long time ago already science-based targets for decarbonizations, one of the pioneers in this transformation and sustainability reporting. Giulia, what was your experience? How did the sustainability reporting help with the process? And what tips can you give for other companies that are starting now?
So thank you, Matthias. I think that, as you can say before, we are a company that started many, many years ago in this kind of roadmap and process. So for us, growing in renewable electrification are exactly the key words that all contribute to this kind of major commitment, fight the climate change, and so the reduction of CO2 emissions. So for us, the certification and setting targets certified by science-based target is fundamental in order to create trust and credibility of our project. But allow me to say that this kind of transition is absolutely necessary, that is a just transition. So innovability, so innovation and sustainability are exactly two main elements that allow us to reach the major targets that we have. But in order to have a credible journey to net zero, we have to guarantee two things: accountability and transparency. And in terms of transparency that create trust, sustainability report is a fundamental instrument to do this. Because through the sustainability report, you can describe your roadmap, your plan, your progress. So in our opinion, sustainability report is not the end of the process, is exactly the description of the progress of our plan to reach our target. So it's this different approach that we have. And also sustainability report is exactly the basis to guarantee transparency on the new financial instruments linked to this kind of important target, and also to the remuneration of the people inside the company. So if I may to give a suggestion to other companies, I think that sustainability report and in general corporate reporting framework is absolutely fundamental to create this kind of global movement, because the roadmap to net zero is a global movement that needs partnership, that needs the all work together. And the first step is absolutely the measurement and the transparency of the progress that can create new opportunities to do that.
Great. I love that, Giulia. I think this both internal transparency, accountability, and motivation to get the culture change in the organization, and then to really let the external stakeholders see what you're doing and what instruments you're using. I think that's an excellent tip, because I've seen a lot of companies go for compliance first, but actually there's a great opportunity in the reporting. Now we have another corporate case study, the local poster boy of net zero, Raymond. You have done it already. I mean, in your case, you didn't want to wait till 2050. You did it here and now, certified by IFC Edge. How did you do it, and what were the benefits?
Yeah, thanks, Matthias. We're very proud of this latest achievement. I think there are three things we learned on our journey for net zero carbon, right? So an International Finance Corporation challenged us and said, can you take up this challenge to be a net zero carbon champion? It was quite intimidating for us. But we said, let's go for it. Let's take that challenge. And we were the first in the world to achieve net zero carbon certification for a portfolio of buildings. And I think the three learnings for us is, one, we come from the Philippines. So it does not matter which country you're from. You don't need to be from a rich, developed country to be able to become net zero. Number two, all of our buildings are existing buildings. So you don't need to have a brand new shiny building in order to be net zero carbon. In fact, bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions come from existing buildings, and that's definitely an area that we need to focus on. And then I think the third is, we're relatively a small company. Yes, we have 7 buildings, but we're not publicly held. We're not a conglomerate like a lot of the other big companies. And so even if you have a modest size, you can go net zero. So really excited to share this with everyone, because I think the message here is, yes, you can be a company in the Philippines and achieve that net zero commitment.
That's a wonderful encouragement for all our listeners out there. It can be done. It can be done here and now. And if I'm not mistaken, you have to show that you are 40% more efficient than average buildings. So that means you're actually consuming a lot less electricity. That means your operational cost of running is massively reduced by being that efficient. So that should be another good thing for the profit and loss account at the end of the year. So now we have a slightly different angle. And Raymond, I think you should go even more green by going Calbo or Bold. Saves time, saves shampoo, saves water. I think Kim is already there.
I may get there, Matthias. I may get there.
Yes, one day. I'm looking forward to that. And Kim is already there, all the way from Japan, and he has been writing and researching on carbon washing. Now, this is a very interesting perspective now. Kim, tell us what carbon washing is and how some of the companies might have ended up on the wrong track, and what should be done to make this all credible, like our 2 case studies we have just heard.
So first of all, thank you very much, Matthias, for my how do I say it? My style choices. And but on the other hand, so carbon washing is basically the equivalent of greenwashing in the carbon space. And why did we and my co-author, who's the head of research at Sustainable Finance Research at Stanford, why did we choose to even make a separate term? Because we found carbon or carbon data has become sort of the new currency in sort of the net zero age. And basically everyone is talking about carbon. There's a lot of talk about, some of you might know, like scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions in terms of disclosure. And being also one of the 15 members of the Sustainability Standards Boards of the GRI, that is a term that comes often along, is that, as was said, everyone is now pledging also the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And I'm someone who is a bit more how do I say it, differentiated towards some of these structures that have been set up, notably the SBTI and the CDP. So some of the very known frameworks in terms of measuring carbon, because one of the key problems with carbon is that there's a lot of announcements, what we call in our paper ex post. There's a lot of announcements and you get concrete reputational benefits from that, because people think, oh, we set a target, so we are on a good path. But merely just announcing a target is just the very beginning, and is the what we call the ex post portion. So actually the implementation of said pledges that leaves a lot to desire. And even the Climate Action 100, as we also describe in our paper, shows that CAPEX and OPEX, so capital expenditure and operational expenditure, is very much misaligned, especially for those, for many companies that do announce net zero pledges. So there's a lot of talk, but the action does currently not hold up. And especially as someone from who is also active in the GRI in terms of disclosure, that raises a lot of questions that we also expose in our paper. And one of the cases that we do deal with is the SBTI, the Science Based Targets Initiative, because what we say is you have these organizations which do benefit from past trust. I will so the 4 organizations were in charge of the SBTI, but the capacity to carry out any checks and to verify any of the figures that are reported to the SBTI is not there. They do not have it. They do not have enough human resources, or sometimes even the technical capacity, because there's a large difference between someone who is an expert in climate policy versus a climate scientist. They are not the same. And there's a capacity gap in terms of knowing and identifying whether any of the figures that are reported are correct or not. And that is what we identified. So we try to find indicators in our paper, or describe indicators that show whether or not what's the trajectory that companies are on in terms of their net zero path are reliable or not. And currently that is not the case. A lot of the data, if we look, for example, at data providers, currently there's large divergences in terms of carbon data. So we say currently there's a lot of announcements, and also with the COP26, the race to net zero, there's just a lot of announcements, but currently the actual data is not reliable enough to back up any of these significant cuts in carbon emissions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dr. Kim. Very interesting insight. We need scientific credibility. It ain't easy to measure all your carbon, especially if you look at the scope 3, which is upstream and downstream. But some organizations have their biggest carbon footprint in their value chain. So maybe I go back to Jade, because the Singapore Exchange is getting involved in a carbon exchange. And Jade, how are you gonna make this happen in the most credible way to support the carbon gold rush, but make sure that it goes on the right track?
Thank you for that. So Climate Impact X, just as some background, has a vision to enable exactly that scalable, voluntary carbon market built on transparency, integrity, and quality. And it was formed out of an initiative by the Singapore government's emerging task force, Stronger Task Force, last year. And the 4 shareholders are DBS, Standard Chartered, Temasek, and ourselves. It's going to be a global exchange as well as a marketplace for companies to access high quality carbon credits. And how we're going to do this with technology is we're leveraging satellite monitoring, machine learning, and blockchain technology to enhance the transparency, integrity, and the quality. We are wanting to assist the market in terms of the scale, price discovery, and to standardize the quality, because we believe that in turn, this will attract international finance, and as well as help to catalyze the development of new carbon credit projects, which I believe Andrew alluded to as well in his previous question. So how do we match the growing demand for carbon credits to the efforts to achieve carbon net zero, which, like the other panelists have said, is gaining pace, but we want it to be backed by transparency and integrity, and that's what the carbon exchange can achieve.
Thanks, Jade. Excellent. Now, on a very practical level, I know, Raymond, as part of the EDGE certification, you needed to compensate with carbon credits the remaining carbon footprint that was left. Where did you buy your carbon credits?
Yeah, so I guess carbon washing, big issue, I think, within our industry. So I think the most important thing before I go to purchasing carbon credits is, especially for real estate players, carbon offset or carbon credit is the very last thing you do, right? I think it's very important that you first focus on reducing your power demand. You first focus on optimizing your buildings and your structures as much as you can to squeeze absolutely the best efficiency and performance. And then after that, then you go to renewables. And then after renewables, whatever is left over, that is just the bare minimum, because it's very difficult to actually offset all of that. Then you will have to really go into carbon offsets. So we did purchase of carbon offsets to the UN. The UN has a portal for purchasing carbon offsets. It was provided to us by IFC as one of the accredited carbon offset mechanisms under EDGE. So we had some leftover. Even if we do source to renewable geothermal energy, there is some leftover carbon. Plus we have emergency generator sets, which are diesel-based. We also have some residual emissions. So whatever was not captured in our efforts to source renewable power, we offset by purchasing carbon through this UN portal.
Great, thanks, Raymond. I saw a question flashing up on, I think, carbon capture. Do you think carbon capture plants, which take off carbon from the air and converts it into stone, or there are many different variations of that, some others fuel as well, will be a viable commercial solution for runaway climate change? Maybe I can address that to the two corporate representatives, Chairman Piqui Lopez and as well Giulia. Maybe you can both comment on that, how realistic you see it. And Chairman Piqui Lopez, if I remember correctly, you guys have a lot of forest nature-based solutions that you use as carbon sinks, right?
Yeah, that's right. First, just on that on that question of CCUs, carbon capture, use, and storage. No? They put it underground. It's there, but it's not moving as fast yet, and it's probably still on the expensive side. So I personally, we're not looking at it from a corporate standpoint. What we are looking at, of course, is a nature-based. We have. It just so happens, because of all our geothermal concession areas, we have about 250,000, close to 250,000 hectares, maybe about, that's 1% of the country's land mass, in our concession areas that are mostly very among the best forest areas, not around our geothermal. And right now, though, I think it's still, although we take care of it, and then not only that, we study the biodiversity there and all. And so we know basically what we're also trying to preserve. It's the whole ecosystem, and we don't just plant trees. You really try to preserve the forest as a community. Today, we still don't get the carbon credits from that, but we'd like to do that, because if we can do that, then we'd also involve even a lot of the indigenous peoples and a lot of the local communities in being able to protect those forests. But we are protecting it, but we're not getting any credit for it. No? One day, I think, as the market becomes more alive. In fact, it was a question I was throwing to our own people yesterday. No, there is a trust issue involved in carbon credits, as Raymond was also mentioning. Carbon credits, you can buy it for 10 US cents to as much as $75 per metric ton, and the verification process is not good. So if we're going to do it, we have to look for ways to sort of like provide for that credibility of the process all the way through, so that people know what they're buying.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I will come back to Andrew on that point, and I think it was as well a point that Jade mentioned before. But first to Enel, are you considering carbon capture storage? What's your view on that?
Thank you, Matthias. Consider that exactly as Piggy said before, we want to guarantee credibility in this kind of process. So our focus in this moment is exactly to change our energy mix, to focus the attention to reduce our emission, changing our approach to produce energy. So in this moment, we haven't a specific carbon capture plan because we wanted to really eliminate this kind of CO2 emission where it's possible. And we want to invest in innovation to do that, for example. So for us in this moment in our plan, we will analyze in the next future, and we are studying about that, but the work is completely ongoing on this kind of topic. In the next step of our process. In this step, we wanted to really reduce our CO2 emission, focusing on our way to produce energy. I don't know in the next future what we will change, because this kind of market is really ongoing, is really changing every day. So, but our position in this moment, we work exactly on our asset in this moment.
Great. So the message here is really core business, internally optimization, and then Andrew linked to that example from first gen with all their landmass, the biodiversity, the local community. Will there be an AI supported streamlined way of monitoring those carbon credits and building in positively the SDG value that is being delivered?
Thanks for the question. I think, first of all, Raymond, I think I'll focus on that point as well that Raymond made too about the offsetting is the adjunct. It's the last thing you do. It's important as part of your trajectory because most industries will not be able to get to net zero on their own. They can't engineer their way to it, but it should be the last thing they do. So focus on your own reduction first and foremost. Okay, so that was a very good point Raymond made. And Picky was also talking, I think, about the issue around the credibility. So there's two parts to that. There's the credibility of the offsets, and that's an area where AI is being deployed. We don't do that part of the ecosystem. There's plenty of far more intelligent and people who have the scientific background also to focus on that component. We come more from a market, and that is a critical pathway and an absolutely fundamental pathway to achieving offsets and finding offsets for your decarbonisation that fit the ESG profile that you're committed to your stakeholders and that are fully verified and are very real. Okay, we believe very much in nature-based solutions as a primary way, which Vicky was also talking about there. But what then the second part is around price transparency. What are you actually paying for? So once the certification, you're agreed with what the product is that you've got, and the certification of that carbon offset is clear to you, and it fits the profile of what you want to integrate into your trajectory, then it's about what's the price. And that's where we come in. So we can help you understand that some projects, the same project might be trading at $5 and also at $20, right? So we're trying to help the whole ecosystem, whether you're a developer at the front end of the value chain or you're an end retiree corporate, understand what the true value is of these certified projects and the components of the ESG which are embedded in the 17 SDGs and what the value of each one of them is. Because that helps you also, again, communicate to your stakeholders and to understand how you budget for this as well as part of your trajectory to net zero. And the beauty of this whole ecosystem is that because it's new, we can deploy technology like AI, which is resisted in many other industries because of the resistance to change. But that is a super exciting possibility for what we're talking about here today too, harnessing the power of AI.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. We have another question coming up. I will later on go back to Sara, looking at the SDG values of the decarbonization. But this question, with the sustainability reporting related policies across the region, how do we ensure companies report accurately? How can we adopt this practice to climate-related disclosure reporting? I think, Katrina, maybe you can kick that one off based on your practical experience. And then I would like Dr. Kim as well to share his thoughts on this, because that's very much in line with his research. So, Katrina?
Sure, Matthias. So in relation to the first question, how it can be reported accurately. So I think the only real way for companies to know whether they are reporting things accurately is for them to get external assurance on the matter. And there are a lot of companies already that are doing this particular practice, and it's a natural progression into the path or the journey of companies related to sustainability. That for the probably first few years, that they will just try to gather all the information or metrics that they have, but as they progress and as they mature, then they get external assurance on it. The second question, again, would you be able to share? I forgot.
I think the second question was related to how we can adopt this to climate-related disclosure reporting. Yeah.
Yes. So in relation to climate risk disclosure reporting, and I guess a leading practice still in relation to this is the TCFD recommendations. So you would want to start first with trying to see how you're faring in relation to the recommendation. So try to assess first whether there are gaps that you would need to address. Because getting to the accuracy portion would probably take a bit more time. So if you haven't really done it in the first few years, I suggest you really focus first on getting things, improving your coverage in relation to it, improving your quality, and then hopefully in the next few years, then you would be able to also get external assurance on the matter. So that's it.
Great, thank you, Katrina. And Dr. Kim, a quick comment from your side. How can we raise the bar of credibility in the reporting and the verification and the standards?
First of all, it's a great question, and there are steps that are now being taken, and there are actually steps very recently also in the updated universal standards of the GRI. So one of the things that we now see is what is actual competence and what is actual expertise to make sure the reporting actually corresponds to what is being said. So what I mean by that is, Katrina mentioned assurance. Assurance is great, but what we also wrote in the GRI is assurance needs to be carried out by actual people who know what they're talking about, by subject matter experts. It's not enough to just do a weekend course on ESG or sustainability and call yourself a sustainability expert. That is what we are now seeing a lot, or what a lot of institutions are doing under the pressure of showing their sustainability credentials. They just add the terms ESG or sustainability in front of existing job titles. That is what is happening, but that creates a credibility gap. And the thing is, now we see regulators moving against that. So the GRI mentioned that assurance or assurers need to show actual subject matter expertise. You can have the best report in the world, but if it's assured by people, for example, on biodiversity, who have no expertise in biodiversity, except for seeing BBC World or BBC Planet, that is not enough. And that's now regulators are looking. So a very interesting development was, for example, in the European Union, now for the first time, banks are now have to go a stress test on climate-related risk. And for the first time, the regulator asked, first of all, who are the people in your organization who you consider to be experts on climate-related risk, on ESG? And second, and that is the big difference, please indicate in their CVs or in there where you think what corresponds to expertise that makes them qualified to analyze these risks. So that is where the additional credibility comes from. So there's a lot of pressure, and that is what I labeled competence greenwashing. I wrote an article about that there's now a pressure to also greenwash credentials, so that a lot of people suddenly become sustainability experts overnight. And that creates risks also in the reporting, because assurance is worthless if it's carried out by someone who cannot. That is like getting a radiology assessment by your neighborhood chef. It does not make sense. And that is where we're now getting. So subject matter expertise So actually looking at who is carrying out those assessments, because the financial sector, like the corporate sectors, the non-financial components or the sustainability components are often still carried out by people who have no tangible or like no credible track records in sustainability or in environment. And I think that is where now the regulators become more aware, because that opens the door for greenwashing or for carbon washing. Right. So that is something that will change, and I think that will improve the quality.
Great, thanks, Dr. Kim. I guess the side message is as well, especially for our youngsters listening online or being part of this event, there is a need for huge expertise and competency. This is the perfect career path for you guys. Get in this. It's amazing what job opportunities will be there, but make sure you get credible expertise and Google Dr. Kim's carbon washing articles to learn more. Now, Sarah Jane, coming back to you with this best of world notion of building in all these SDG values into our decarbonization projects, whether they are internal or whether they're even, you know, with the local community or both. I mean, that's all about biodiversity. That's about supply chain relationship, community relationship. There is so much good and social justice that we could bring to the table. How can we optimize and accelerate all of that?
So to optimize and accelerate this is really changing the way planning norms. And going the low carbon route actually would secure more SDG outcomes, better socioeconomic outcomes than what we have currently. So if we look at, for example, the volatility in coal and gas, high spot prices making supplies unaffordable, there's going to be increased volatility in these prices as supply and demand struggle to find a balance. And this is where the price stability of renewable energy and storage would offer better opportunities for business and this price stability, assuming one can have low cost of capital accessible in these emerging markets, is more sensible than this current fossil fueled growth or industrialization that is being pitched. So I think in terms of reaching SDGs, this goes hand in hand with the low carbon transition.
So do you think we could, as well in the Philippines, get more resources to roll out renewables on a rural level to help those people that are affected by the high fossil fuel prices?
Certainly, there is already an economic case, a financial case to shift the small island and isolated grids to renewables. We're talking prices of up to $1.50 to $2 per kilowatt hour in some very far-flung areas where renewables could go down to about 15 to 20 cents or something on per kilowatt hour. So look, it's quite a price reduction to shift. The other point that's really important is the low cost of capital and access to capital. Is a lot of the lock into fossil fuel is a result of not being able to have access to low cost of capital. So then you would go with something that has higher operational and maintenance costs versus something that's has more upfront cost, but offers price stability and lower cost over the long run.
Great, that's a wonderful vision. I hope we can make that happen. We have Jade from the exchange commenting, giving her views on the previous questions with regards to the reporting credibility and the climate reporting. Jade, let us know your points on that.
Sure. So coming from an exchange, we've been a firm supporter of TCFD from the beginning, and we really believe in walking the talk. So we've implemented that in our own sustainability reporting. But beyond that, we know that it poses challenges to the ecosystem and the companies that are, I guess, listed on our exchange particularly. So we are doing a lot of work around capacity building as a future-proofing strategy of how to tackle these challenges. So we're actually rolling out a TCFD training next week with the Sustainable Stock Exchange, as well as the CDSB. And this is about how do we start giving practical tools to the ecosystem to do these reports, and trying to understand where the gaps are and how we can assist. We also, on our website, we've got a e-learning of how to develop sustainable reports. And we want to be there to help develop the industry, especially as the TCFD has recently just brought out new guidance, which is the first time they've come out with updated recommendations in 4 years. And it's on various metrics and targets, including that companies start to disclose on Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. We recently, as SGX, brought out a public consultation, which was closed at the end of September, to get feedback from the market on various suggestions that we're looking to roll out. And it's going to be a phased approach in terms of climate reporting on a comply or explain basis in 2022, and gradually making it mandatory sector by sector over 2023 and 2024. So we know this is a journey. And as an exchange, we're looking at trying to help from a capacity building perspective to make the information that's put out into the ecosystem as valuable as possible for various stakeholders.
Yeah, great point. We really need to focus on building up the capacity. We have another question coming in. There are companies working on reducing carbon footprint. How can we engage other emission contributors to follow their lead? I guess the question is, how can we get the current laggards on board, the companies that are not moving? Open floor here. Who wants to chime in? How do we get the laggards going?
I can give a try here, Matthias. It's a big challenge, right? So I've been working on the green building front here in the Philippines for many years, and it's always an uphill struggle. Trying to convince people to change the way that they normally do. Business as usual is really what people want to stick to, right? It's the change is always for so many people so difficult, so challenging, and many senior leaders just want to keep to what they know best. So I really feel it's about leadership. I think we need to be able to inspire leadership, the most senior leaders, and also the next layer of decision makers in these companies, to really embrace this challenge to become more sustainable and to start this net zero journey. Because if the leaders start and create across their organization this commitment that say, look guys, we're committing to this, we're going to create a plan, we're going to put resources behind all of this. If they put that into place, I think the organization is set up better. We've tried it. We've tried hitting it from the middle managers. We've tried it from the other staff. We have a lot of energy and optimism, but if the leaders don't have buy-in, unfortunately, it's not going to move. That's just from my experience.
Matthias, can I add?
Yes.
I guess being in the power business. Oops, wonder why I'm echoing. Yeah, being in the power business, I'm under no illusion. Also, sometimes people reducing their carbon footprints. It's seen a bit like a hygiene factor. And so getting that's why even the fact that we sell clean energy, sometimes I still have to compete. Even with an RE100, there's an RE100 multinational, and I had to compete, and by just a few centavos per kilowatt hour difference, it was given to a coal plant. Versus the geothermal I was offering. No? So I'm under no illusion. No? Now I think what's important also here is for us to think through. If you want people to reduce their carbon footprint, make it pay. And for me, one of the lowest hanging fruit is energy efficiency. So it's that service that I'm sort of starting to offer now to our electricity consumers. And if they can bring down their consumption, the needless consumption, it also brings down their carbon footprint, also brings down their costs. We had one particular customer who, from a huge bill of 60 million pesos, brought it down by 10 million pesos. And just finding pumps that were going on and off at night, which didn't have to. And it's that simple. But to me, the economics has to speak if we want to get people to also bring down their carbon footprint.
Definitely. And actually, the good news is in the Philippines, it works. Speaking for the Philippine Stock Exchange, where I am a part-time ESG advisor, we switched to first-gen geothermal, And the price is even cheaper now than previously the grid price. Plus, we slashed our carbon footprint overnight by virtually 50%. So the possibilities are there. The law is there in the Philippines. It's actually very easy to switch and make that step, and then even save money immediately, and then get additional advice on energy efficiency. So that's great. I think if we combine that with what Jade was talking about, the exchanges or other regulatory frameworks, step by step, encouraging raising the bar with credibility and as well capacity building. You know, if you force people, it just becomes a compliance issue. But that way, step by step, raising the bar. Dr. Kim, do you think that works, that even you will be happy with that kind of iterative credibility process?
It is, of course, there's always ways, like, in terms of, like, getting stakeholders involved from different, and there's, how do I say it? But I think the credibility right now harkens primarily on, how do I say it? Whether or not anything that is being announced can, what we call in research MRV, can it be measured, can it be reported, and can it be verified? And I think unless those, whatever the steps are, unless you have that, irrespective of the technology that you use, if you cannot prove that anything that you're announcing, I sometimes because the task is just so grand, of getting where we need to in terms of carbon reductions. Sometimes announcements provide us with some relief that not everything is lost, and we need that. But on the other hand, we also need more honesty in that merely announcements do not get anything done. And what Federico said is quite eye-opening, is that there needs to be some honesty about what is achievable. And some of the solutions, like, for example, energy efficiency, they are very efficient. And others, for example, nature-based solutions, as someone who also comes from an environmental science background, there needs to be honesty that nature-based solutions are really difficult. They cost money because they take time. It takes years. And now with climate change, we are not even sure whether or not what you're planning today will actually turn out the way in the future. Because if you, for example, in the Philippines, you plan, for example, restoration of mangroves, you're not even sure whether or not your project will turn out the way you planned it, because you're not sure how sea level rise, how temperatures, and that makes it so difficult. So we should go for the solutions that are easily verifiable, energy efficiency, and that shows credibility, in my opinion, because then you show. So, for example, for me, carbon capture, usage, and storage is one of those things that is always announced, but there's no project right now that is at scale and that actually delivers what is being promised. So I would rather go for the solution, and that also is part of the credibility. If you do not announce projects that are really far-fetched, that might yield huge benefits, but rather go for the low-hanging fruit. And I think that is, also part of the honesty to say, we know the challenge is there, but we are now really implementing what we can actually manage. And I think that's great. Makes also for credible businesses.
Thanks, Dr. Kim. Quick comments from Andrew, and then we do our wrap-up session where each one of the panelists can say their final words of wisdoms on the way forward.
Thanks. I just wanted to quickly comment on the issue about laggards. There's a group called Transition Pathway Initiative, which I think I'd recommend people to follow and to have a look at. They have over 30 trillion of assets under management in their club. They have 108 members. They are forcing corporates to take this seriously from an ESG perspective and from a climate change perspective, right? This is no longer Greenpeace buying 5 shares and going bang drums in an AGM. This is forcing behavioural change. So I think that's how you force the laggards to start to change their behaviour. Financing is going to cost you more. Green bonds are going to be cheaper. So there is if you want to retain talent in your organization, you want to attract talent to your organization, you need to be participating here. And those executives that don't understand this and board members that don't understand this will be resigned to history and they will be judged accordingly. So I think that's extremely important. And anyone who does make commitments to net zero needs to have at least annual targets that are publicly communicated, and they're held accountable for that. That will impact their bonuses, it will impact their KPIs, and it will also impact their seat on a board at the next AGM, or it will impact their ability to retain their corporate C-suite salary. That's how we push the laggards, I think.
Thanks, Andrew. Massive market forces are happening. That's good news. Now we are going to have our wrap-up session. Each one of you has 45 seconds to share your final recommendation, what we need to do, what we can do, how we can benefit. Let me start off with Katrina.
Hi, Matthias.
Are you ready?
So,
yeah.
Yes. In relation to what we can do, I guess from the discussions, it has been apparent that climate change, decarb is a really big issue, and it's a complex one. So to be able to achieve real change, no single industry, no single company, or no single organization or country can really solve this issue on its own. So therefore, what we really need to be able to do in relation to this is to collaborate and integrate with one another, because again, climate change is an issue that knows no bounds. So that's why we should also be doing the work, the solutions for this with no boundaries. That's it.
Great, thank you, Katrina. Collaboration. And Raymond, what is your final word of wisdom?
So I'd like everyone attending today to ask their company or our organization, where are we on our net zero journey? Because if you don't know the answer to that, I think it's important to start having those questions and conversations. Many, I'll speak for the Philippine or emerging market context, many companies have still not even started those conversations. And I think it's very important that we start asking those questions in our organizations in order to get the process moving for us to start thinking about how we can get started on that journey.
Great, excellent. Let me make my list here. I would suggest next up Jade, then Sara, then we can have Dr. Kim, Andrew, and finally the final voice will, and Pique Lopez, and the final voice will come from Italy. So Jade, over to you.
So I think what we've all agreed is that Asia is very much, it's a global engine of growth. And as a region, it's quite important how we collectively, I think collectively is the word we need to use here, tackle climate change and the action we take around it. It's either going to make or break. Sustainability is very much a journey. It's not a destination, but it's very important that we have those conversations, like Raymond was saying, to act now. And it's really important from an Asia Pacific context. I think another key point is realizing that there's gaps in, and how do we future-proof the industry? How do we build capacity? How do we speak to leadership? How do we lead in our own organizations to set targets, to show that we walking the talk, that we leading? So I think those are all good points which I've gained from this panel around partnership, around collectively working together as a whole system.
Great, thanks, Jade. Leading for walking the talk. And Sara?
I'd just like to reiterate the system that we have today was not built to contend with non-financial and economic shocks like COVID and climate change. And we are way off track to keep to the 1.5 degree limit of the Paris Agreement. And so we do need annual ambition raising, corporates, governments, to safeguard the limit of the Paris Agreement. And we need to invest out of this risk this decade towards the opportunities in this low carbon transition. And key to that is technology transfer, reskilling of workers, and low cost of capital.
Great, thank you so much. Very precise, and I like this annual ambition. to really recalibrate again and again. Dr. Kim, short perspective from you.
Well, ambition is great, but again, currently there's much more talk than walk, and greenwashing is coming to the agenda. And now there are more and more ways where we do not rely on the companies to tell us what their sustainability performance is, because we can monitor it without their input. So it is up to the companies to actually display that they are doing the necessary steps, because they more and more will be found out, be it with satellites, be it with other technologies. So it is better to be proactive and act than to wait and be found out and be found out to do greenwashing. So better act now than wait.
Great, thank you. Action now, Dr. Kim. And Andrew?
I'll make it very short. I think echo Dr. Kim, proactivity. Get involved now. And don't just leave it to others, right? Every single person on this call, on this panel, everyone, be the change that we want to see and lead that change. Make a case study for yourself, right? And bring people along the journey. But it's up to each one of us individuals, because we can change and move the dial significantly.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And Chairman Piqui Lopez?
Yeah, thank you. No, I want to thank the rest of the people on this panel. It's been a terrific experience. I think I've learned so much also, quite a lot. But let me just say that, I think it's easy enough to say, okay, we can do things on our own and put up more renewable plants, etc. But really, we need to get our efforts all around, a roadmap that's coordinated. No? And in a sense, because there's so much policy, legislation, and even a lot of the disclosure and transparency mechanisms that need to be put into place, and then the rules, but also so that it can allow investment in a lot of what we're calling new paradigm assets, because it's going to change things. So it's not from beyond the RE plants, energy efficiency, storage, flexible plants, hydrogen, and not to forget microgrids in underserved areas where they still don't have 24/7 electricity. And then once you do that, I mean, you can change lives with that. But in a sense, all of this needs a lot of collaboration, coordination, and really, as Andrew is saying, being the change that can make all of this happen. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. And then Giulia, what is your word of wisdom from Italy?
Thank you very much. I agree with Mr. Lopez, but I think also that generation and production is only the first step that we have, a fundamental step, but the first step. We have also to start to innovate in process and in our open mind to analyze really the interconnection of the different parts of the roadmap of the energy transition, considering that we have different level of maturity of the stakeholder that work and have to contribute to this kind of global movement. If you consider, for example, demand response is exactly an example of energy efficiency and capex deferral. But at the same time, I think that trust, transparency, and robust skill and measurement are fundamental to collect the effort of the different parts of the world in order to manage correctly this kind of global movement.
Great, wonderful. I learned so much. I got inspired. I think before we take the photo up in a minute, I would just like to say, let's take action, credible action, inform ourselves, build our capacity, both for us personally and organizationally. Let's be the change with true decarbonization at a personal level and at an organizational level. The opportunities are far greater than the costs. Managing risks will be beneficial, and exploiting the decarbonization economy opportunity will have a lot of great opportunities aligned with it. Delivering on the SDGs, using them as a calibrator for your business development in the context of decarbonization will give you a lot of opportunities to contribute back through your core business. Let's make it happen. Let's decarbonize and accelerate. Thank you so much for a wonderful panel. Thank you, everybody, for contributing, for GRI, for SM to make this all happen. I really enjoyed it. I got inspired. and let's take a beautiful picture together. All right, I think we got that. So over to you, Doc Ali, and thank you again, everyone.
Thank you very much, Matthias. I know we gave you such a very tall order when we asked you to moderate this powerhouse panel, but you were able to, make sure that everyone were able to give their views and perspective. And of course, thank you very much to all our panelists. That was a very thought-provoking discussion on the climate crisis and what net zero really means for all of us. And I particularly like this discussion since yesterday, every time we finish a session, I feel smarter. So I didn't think I would even feel more smarter than I was this morning. But yes, it was very illuminating, very interesting, and very informative. We heard so many opposing and complementary views, as well as complementary opposing perspective. But I think everyone is on the same plane when they say that this climate crisis, the climate crisis we're facing now, is really urgent, and we just don't need passion and ambitions. We need concrete actions to be able to resolve to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis. And it's not enough. So our speakers were saying that it's not enough that we just have we have ambitions, of course, complemented by action, and also we have to be accountable for the actions that we do. And sustainability reporting is one way that we can put it out there that where we are in our sustainability journey. And these reports are not just marketing materials that companies should come up with. They should be should have integrity, and they should be credible. And this is where the credibility of data comes in. We also heard about taking, and in this crisis, it's really important for companies to really take bold, innovative, and decisive actions, while at the same time also doing those action, what we call low hanging fruits. So I think yeah, that's a very long takeaway for me. Sorry, I always get carried away with when they ask me to do a takeaway. So anyway, to close our day, let's hear it from Asthildur Hjaltadottir, the Chief Regional Officer of the Global Reporting Initiative.
Hello. Thank you, Ali, for the introduction and for giving me the honor to provide the closing remarks for the two-day summit. So I would like to start by saying good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all of you, and warm greetings from Amsterdam. I would like to start by acknowledging SM Investment as the co-host of this event that is organized jointly by GRI and SM Invest, and appreciate, of course, all the efforts from the teams of both organizations to pull this wonderful event off. I also like to recognize our media partners, EcoBusiness and Manila Bulletin, who have been helping us really make this event known. And as you have seen in social media, they have been extremely successful in doing so. Also, I would like to acknowledge the support of our governmental donors, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, or SECO. They are supporting GRI's efforts in this region and many other regions as well. And for that, we are very grateful. And of course, we need to thank all the 30 plus speakers and moderators who have shared their wisdom and expertise with all of us over these past 2 days. So thank you all for all your efforts and contributions. And of course, thank all of you for taking part in this wonderful event, all the participants. And I'm sure you, like the rest of us, you are leave the event with a lot of food for thought and a lot of very interesting takeaways. This is the third time that GRI and SM actually join forces to organize an ASEAN summit. And the first one was in 2018, and the world was different then. And I was actually there in Manila to attend, and that was fantastic. And but the last 20 years have been extraordinary. So we find ourselves in a very different place, and but we have also evolved very nice and effective ways to still communicate to each other and in a forum like this, and that is of course wonderful. But so the last 20 months have been very extraordinary, and because of the pandemic, as we all know, but it seems that we are cautiously now seeing light at the end of the tunnel and entering into what is sometimes called the post-COVID era. And therefore, the theme of this summit, Leaving No One Behind, was of course very fitting, because there is a lot of rebuilding and recovering to be done all over the world. The program of this summit was very varied, I have to say, very different topics that have been covered. Yesterday, there was a session on the next generation of leaders, and it's very encouraging to see for all of us that how they are actually building sustainability into their business strategies and practices. So I think that's very encouraging for all of us. And we also saw yesterday in a session that how financial markets are increasingly playing an important role by demanding that companies conduct their business in a responsible way, and as such contribute to sustainable development. And this is, of course, a trend that we have been noticing for quite some time, and it's good to see that this is continuing. And then today there was a session about the purpose-driven business, which emphasized the focus that there is a shift from mainly focusing on maximizing the value for the shareholders, or to actually something that's often called stakeholder capitalism, where the focus is creating a long-term value for all stakeholders. And this is, of course, a very positive and a trend that will hopefully lead to the very needed focus on sustainable development that benefits all, everyone, and including, of course, the planet. In a recent event where there was even one speaker who mentioned that even within the sphere of sustainability, that there is also an increased shift from a focus on environmental issues to actually including the social issues and the governance issues, giving them more emphasis, which is, of course, another very much needed and welcoming development. Now, the topic of the fourth session that we just saw here, that just finished, about the journey to net zero goals and to achieving those, was of course very relevant now that we are counting down to the COP26. And I actually, my head is still spinning a little bit after all the very insightful presentations that we got through that session. And I have to say that you know, some of the things that were presented were very terrifying, but I'm also left with quite hopeful, hearing about all these fantastic initiatives that are underway. And it was good to hear the emphasis on terms like accountability, transparency,
And yeah, it is really inspiring to listen to and see what is being done all over, all the initiatives. And also, I was really glad to hear that there was an emphasis of some of the speakers on that we should actually see this or not lose sight of the business opportunities that come with these climate crisis and the ways we are developing to mitigate that, to come out of that. So that is also something that is very important to keep in mind. So, like I said, a lot of food for thoughts after the 2 days event. And for GRI is, we have been in the region, we've been in the ASEAN region since 2019 and built a lot of very important partnerships, as can be seen through all the presentations and events that we have organized. And we are here to help, and we have a lot to offer. So we hope that we will continue to build our presence and make our mark on the developments in the ASEAN region. And yeah, just think, how to conclude such a great event like this. I just want to say that for GRI as a mission-driven organization, it's very inspiring to see that there are so many fantastic initiatives taking place that will also hopefully help us lead to achieving our mission, which is a sustainable future for all. And I think I will just leave it at that. Thank you so much, and just hand it over to you, Ali, and hope to see you all again next year in another ASEAN summit. And who knows, maybe we can really see each other live then. Wouldn't that be nice? Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you so much for those closing words, Asthildur. I think you've done an excellent job of summarizing the discussions that we've had. It's been a remarkably packed and productive 2 days. Perhaps I could just give a reflection, looking back at what I've learned from this, when I think about the 4 conversations that we've all participated in and the keynote speakers. We are coming out of a period of tremendous change. And we have tremendous change ahead of us that's needed to be done. And the expectations of all of our stakeholders on the people who are watching this, the businesses and the business leaders, is that we will rise to that challenge. It's now expected of us, and we have no excuses. We need to be responsible, we need to take action, and we will be judged. If not by them, then certainly by history. For businesses, we need to be clear about our values, and we need to have a purpose that is aligned with sustainable issues. Sustainability is not incompatible with running a business. In fact, it is required to run a business well. Businesses are now expected to take action on all the things that count. And as business leaders, delivering that is not only our challenge, but we have to be authentic. People are very easy to see truth from greenwashing. They're very easy to see airy targets from actions. It's up to us. We are the stewards of the businesses and of the future. We need to be practical. And one of the really big themes of the last 2 days has been that we need to collaborate with each other. This has been fantastic from my point of view. Ali?
Thank you, Tim. It was indeed 2 days of jam-packed, meaningful conversation on the issues we face as a country, and even for the entire humanity. So while our summit ends here, GRI will be sending conference kits to all those who are in Zoom, and we will see if we can try to make it available online as well for all those who attend investments website. Again, the discussion of the summit will be revisited in the coming months in GRI communities and see how we can foster collaboration among the private and public sectors in the ASEAN region moving forward. And I hope you found this two-day summit as informative and as illuminating as we did. Tim?
Yes, thank you. And we look forward to another event next year, as Asthildur said. You know, to everybody
everyone who made this event possible, thank you very much to all our speakers once again, panelists, moderators, Eco Business, Manila Bulletin, our friends in the media, our participants, and Zoom and live stream.
A big, warm thank you to everybody who's been involved in this, from the participants to our media partners, the people organizing this behind the scenes, our panelists, our speakers, and to you for attending. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending, and happy weekend.
Thank you very much for taking part of the ASEAN GRI-SM Sustainability Summit 2021, leaving no one behind. We would like to thank our media partners, Eco Business and Manila Bulletin. Our team will be in touch with you via email for your learning kits. Once again, thank you for your support in making this summit meaningful for all of us. Let's all work together towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and make sure that no one is left behind. Happy weekend to all.